In today's video, I'm going to be covering how I made my submission for the PWNISHER Alternate Realities Render Contest. Before I get into this, I just wanted to say a really quick thank you to everyone that showed all the love on the video. In the last 6 days since it's been live, it's had 10,000 views, 728 likes, and 236 comments. There were lots of people that left some really lovely comments that were very encouraging, so I just wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you very much. Lots of the comments were also asking for a tutorial on how to make it, so just say thank you. I'm going to do a video about how I did the whole thing. I think it's also important to say just before I start that there were lots of comments on the last video from beginners that said this is really cool, so I'm not even going to bother entering now. And while that is really flattering, I replied to all of those comments with something along the lines of, thank you very much, but this shouldn't discourage anyone from getting involved. I'm sure if Clint were here, he would say the same thing as well, but every competition is the same. There can only be a few winners, and if you don't win, it doesn't make your submission worthless at all. The whole idea with this competition is to just make some really cool art, to have fun, and to let people, stretch their creative legs. I've already seen some stuff on Instagram that I think is a lot better than my submission, so I'm probably not going to place in the top 5 either, but I'm not disheartened by that. So I think that's the mindset to take away from this, is don't be upset because you think you might not win, just enjoy the process. And with all that said, let's make some cool art. So this is pretty much the finished scene minus I did the smoke sim in a separate Blender file just because it was quite heavy. Loads of the comments were focused on how I got my custom character to line up with the rig that was supplied, so that's the first thing I'm going to cover because I think a lot of people would like to know how to do that. And then I guess I'll just touch a little bit on the models that I made, and then the water, sculpting the landscape, doing some particles for the rocks and stuff, and that's pretty much everything. So let's get started. So the first thing I did, let's go into a new Blender file and we can sort of start from scratch. I opened up the project template that came with the downloads. Then what I did is delete some of the stuff that I don't need, so that's the character and the sun lamp that was in there. Now, getting the character to line up with this armature that was supplied. All of the official tutorials and advice that was posted in Clint's Discord basically revolved around using the Mixamo add-on. Personally, I haven't used it, but I thought it was kind of annoying that you have to start using loads of third-party tools to actually attach a character to the rig, so I thought there must be a better way of doing it. I tried a few things, I eventually found something that worked pretty well. So if you go to frame 0, the FBX has like a T-pose animation that's in the keyframes, which looks like this. And what I did from here is basically bring in my astronaut model, which is one that I made. So I go to File, Append, Rig and Astronaut, Append. So this is the custom character that I made, and obviously I want this to line up with the rig. Currently it's not in that position. The easiest way that I found to apply the animation from this armature onto the existing character is I used the original rig that I made for this character to pose it into the same position as the T-pose, and then from there you can just parent the mesh onto the new armature with automatic weights. If you have a character that isn't rigged, you can just make a really basic rig. If it's a person and you have the Rigify add-on enabled, you can actually do like a human meta rig. It doesn't have to be super accurate, just get it kind of generally lined up. So if you just do something like this, then once it's roughly in place, you can select your character, then select the rig, press Ctrl P and do parent with automatic weights. I'm not going to do this because I already have a rig for my character. But then, like I said, what you can do is use the new rig that you've made to make the character line up with the provided FBX stuff from Mixamo. So I'm going to scale him up till he's kind of roughly the right size. I'm also going to select the FBX and just turn on in front so I can see what I'm doing. And then I'm going to move the legs so they're kind of in the right position, something like that. And then just get the arms kind of roughly in the same place as well. And it looks like he needs to go back this way a little bit as well. So there we go. That lines up pretty well now. I'm just going to hide this Mixamo one for a second. So now what we had to do is basically apply this pose so that the character no longer relies on the original rig. And to do that, all you have to do is apply the armature modifier. So select one of the objects and go to apply. And if we do this for all of them very quickly. So now if I select the rig and delete it, you can see the character still stays in that position. Now I can press Alt H and unhide the FBX that came from the Mixamo stuff. Then I can select my character, select the rig, press Ctrl P, parent with automatic weights. And now if I go to the first frame and I play the animation, you can see that the part of the mesh that I've currently parented to the armature moves with it. So that's the idea. Then I just did the same thing for the rest of it. And then for the backpack, you can just parent it to one bone. So for example, that one, and then it works like so. And as you can see now, if I hide this, my astronaut is moving with the Mixamo rig. We're on track to a finished render. So then the next thing I did is I added a plane, as you probably saw in the video, and I used an ocean modifier to make the water. To do this, very simple, add an ocean modifier onto the plane, and then you just have to play around with some of the parameters until you get the kind of water you're looking for. Once you've got some water that's looking pretty cool, obviously it's static at the moment, so what I did is go to the first frame, press I on time, which will add a keyframe, then I went forward about 5 frames and I just animated the water. So just change it to a different value and hit I, and that will add a second keyframe. And then if you go to the graph editor, you can select both of those keyframes, press Shift A, change this to linear extrapolation, which will just mean it will carry on at that speed forever. Probably a little bit too fast now, so the beauty of doing these 2 keyframes is I can just space out the keyframes and it will slow down the water. Something like that looks pretty good. The next thing I did is model the various things that he's pulling. So there was another backpack, a crate, and the engine of a spaceship. I'm not going to go over how to model them just because you can kind of see it in the time lapse, and this isn't really a modeling video. So I'm just going to bring those in from the actual project file. To get the stuff to actually move with him as he walks away, I made an empty in his location. So empty plane axis, and then literally I just keyframed it to move with him. So if I hit I, add a location keyframe there, go to the end, move it along to here, add another location keyframe. Then if I select these objects, I can then select the empty, press Ctrl P and parent to object, and now they will move with him. And something that I did to make it feel like these are bobbing up and down in the water a bit is I added a noise modifier onto the location keyframes for the empty. So if I go to graph editor, I can open the Z location, which is the up and down movement. And if I go on to modifiers, add modifier noise, and then I press play, you can see this now makes it wobble up and down. It's obviously way too fast right now, so if I turn the scale right up and the strength down so it's not quite as extreme movements, you can see this is kind of the idea. It's still too strong, so let's go even less. Something like that, just so you feel a little bit of up and down so it's not just translating perfectly in the y-axis or the x-axis. Next, I guess we should talk about the net that was blowing in the wind on top of this stuff. It looked quite cool and I was quite proud of this effect. It's very, very simple. I added a plane and then just scale it up a little bit. I went into edit mode and I subdivided it quite a few times, and then I went through like this and just deleted every other face essentially. When they're all selected, X, delete faces, and then you have this kind of net pattern. And then I just grabbed a few of these edges and extruded them out a bit more so we could have some tassels that are blowing in the wind like this. You want to add a few loop cuts onto these just so that there's some extra geometry there so that they can actually bend properly. And then what I did is I positioned it over the top of the stuff that he's pulling, and I added a cloth sim onto this. These objects already have a collision modifier on them because they're from the previous Blender file. Then if I hit play, it will slowly fall onto the objects and kind of form around them. And then once it's kind of roughly in the right place, I applied the modifier so that this is just the shape of the mesh now. And then to fix the bits where it's kind of intersecting with the meshes, I went into sculpt mode and just sculpted it up a little bit so that it doesn't clip through. The scale of this net's obviously quite far off. I'm just doing this as an example for the video. And then now what I did to get these tassels to blow in the wind is if I select the mesh and go into weight paint mode, if you hold down Alt and then click and drag, what you can do is add gradients onto a mesh. So if I create a gradient for just the ends of these tassels and then the rest of it stays blue, then what you want to do is go to weights and invert, and that will flip it so that the tassels are blue and everything else is red. This vertex group basically holds the information of the weights that I've just painted, and then I'm going to add a new cloth simulation onto this mesh. And under shape, I'm going to set pin group to pinning. And now if I hit play, you can see only the bits of the mesh that I added the gradient onto are actually moving. So then the fun part happens. You can add a wind force field, angle it to the right direction like this, give it loads more strength. And then if I hit play, the tassels blow in the wind. Probably even more than that. There we go. I'm not going to do it in this video, but basically what I did from here is bake the simulation. So you come down to cache and just bake it blowing in the wind so it looks cool. Then once it's baked, I just parented it onto the engine so that it moves with the rest of the parts. I'm just going to delete it for now because it's not really worth doing that again. Let's get the water and stuff back. One thing that lots of people said in the comments that I should add is some interaction with the water. If you look really closely in the breakdown, you can see I actually did add some. I made the astronaut and the stuff that he's pulling dynamic paint brushes, which you can see here, they actually have the modifiers on still because I bought them from the previous file. In the last one, it was really subtle and I didn't really notice how subtle it was until I'd rendered it. And it took me about 12 hours to render it in 4K. So instead of going back and tweaking it, I just decided to leave it. But what you can do is basically turn up some of these settings to increase the amount of interaction that he has with the water. And if I have some time, I'm going to add this and do another render before I actually submit this for the competition. But for anyone that's interested, that's how you do it. And I did actually add it in my original file. It was just very subtle. And then for all the stuff in the background, what I did is just sculpt it. So if I add another plane, I can make this massive. Then if you go into edit mode, I'm just going to subdivide this a little bit and then jump into sculpt mode. And what I can do here is just very, very roughly make some terrain. So I did something like this. I created a little lake in the middle and then I had some kind of rocks and stuff in the foreground like this. So it was something like that. Then once the rough shape was blocked out, I actually used some rock brushes to sculpt the texture of the rock into the geometry. To do that, I turned on dynamic topology, which basically creates a load of topology when you sculpt. I set the detailing from relative to constant detail, and then I turned it up to something like 20, I think. And then if I start, oh, it might have crashed. I might have done it too high. Oh no. Oh, bloody hell. Oh, we're back. Okay, save quick. Let's set this to like 5. Okay, 3 looks pretty good. So once you've tested it out and you've got it to a resolution you're happy with, you can do detail flood fill. And this will basically apply that level of detailing and subdivision to the whole mesh. And now because the mesh has a load of extra resolution, I can actually use some rock brushes from textures.com to sculpt with an alpha that looks like a rock. So if I come under the brush settings, I'm going to add a new texture. I'm going to call this rock brush. And then if I go into the texture settings and open up one of the alphas that I downloaded from textures.com, brushes, rock, flat. Let's try this one. Then back in the brush settings, I'm going to set the stroke to be anchored, and I'm going to change the mapping to random, I think. And then if I click and drag, as you can see when I move the mouse, it's actually creating that geometry and sculpting it in real time. This is a little bit more low resolution than what I did for the actual video, just so it's a bit more interactive for the tutorial. But essentially this is how I got a load of the detail of the rocks in the rock faces, instead of it just being like, you know, this kind of boring flat geometry. So I just went through to a load of the areas and added as much resolution as I could. It also works really well for like breaking up the silhouette of the edges of the rocks here. As you can see, kind of this horizon line looks really boring, how it's just kind of a slope. These rock brushes can really help add some texture into that and kind of change the silhouette based on the shape of the brush. Now, because this is sculpted, it's mega high resolution. So what I did to fix that is I exported it as an OBJ to instant meshes and just did a quick retopology on it. And now, as you can see, I have a low poly version of the ground that's much more usable. Because I did the sculpt really roughly, there's a load of holes in the floor, ignore that. And then I used a particle system just to add some rocks onto this to break up the horizon and, you know, make it a bit more interesting in general. The way I did that is I added an icosphere, added a couple of levels of subdivision surface onto this, and then I jumped into sculpt mode and just pulled it around a little bit like this, just make it look a little bit less spherical. Then I added a displace modifier onto this, add a new texture, just call this displace, go into the texture settings, set it to clouds, and then I just turn the strength down so it's more like that. Very simple way of making a rock. For particle systems, it's good to have more than one just to add some variation. So I'm going to select it, press Shift D. You can set the coordinates to global and that will change the way it displaces. Scale it up a little bit, do another one, it's even smaller. I'm going to select all of them, put them in a new collection called rocks. And then if I select the ground geometry, go to the particle systems tab, add a new particle system. I'm going to call this rocks. Change it from emitter to hair, and then under render, change the render as from path to collection, and then set the instance collection to be the rocks collection we just made. And now, as you can see, there's rocks all over the place. Turn the scale randomness all the way up, which just means that there's a maximum amount of variation in the size. You can also change the number. I think I went for something a bit less, like 600. You can change the seed, which will just change the random variation of where they appear. And I basically just went through until I found a random seed that I quite like the look of. I got a load of stuff from textures.com and just added like moony kind of asteroid surface textures onto the ground. The water is just a glossy shader with the roughness turned right down. I set up the big sphere in the sky as a moon and then made it an emission object and added a couple of other lights and used that predominantly to light the scene, which looked quite cool. As you probably saw, I also placed a spaceship over here. That was really simple, just got a model from online, projected a texture onto it, and then did a quick smoke sim. But I think that covers all the main parts of how I made the scene. Hopefully that will give some people some inspiration for how to do some things to make their scenes better. I'm really looking forward to seeing everyone's work. I think it's going to be really cool when all of the entries come together and they get combined into a massive montage. So there we go, that's how I did it. Hope you guys have enjoyed. Hope there's been some useful tips and stuff in this video. If I have some time before the competition ends, I've got a couple of extra ideas I'm going to add to make this even cooler. So keep your eyes peeled. There might be a version 2 of my submission coming up in the next few weeks. Thanks very much for watching. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.